Great. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Conservative Progress Love Our Union campaign Welsh event. Just one point on housekeeping before we crack on. If you do wish to ask any questions, please do raise them in the chat function, which is on the participants tab at the bottom of your screen. And there's also a Q&A function. I'll be keeping an eye on that, and I'll pose some questions to our panelists. So like I said, it's great to be joined today by everyone on the webinar. My name is Ed McGuinness. I'm the head of events at Conservative Progress. And we're delighted to be joined tonight by Glyn Davies, chairman of the Welsh Conservatives, former MP for Montgomery Shire, and a former assembly member from 1999 to 2007. We will be joined at 7:15 by Robin Millar, MP for Aberconwy and chairman of the Conservative Union Research Group. He's just been called into a division in Westminster, so I'm afraid that will be him out of action for about 10 to 15 minutes, and he sends his apologies. And also, I know everyone was looking forward to seeing Paul Davies tonight, the leader of the Welsh Conservatives, but I'm afraid he, at the last minute, has been called into the Senate to conduct some business there. But we will hear from Paul very soon with our members. So we've had a really good series of events so far, with our launch event with the chairman from across the country, and with our event with Douglas Ross, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives. And tonight we will hear about issues and the state of the union in Wales. And I would just love to welcome Glyn again and hand over to you to maybe discuss for a couple of minutes the state of the union in Wales. Thank you so much, Glyn.
Well, thanks, Ed. I've obviously got a rather more prominent position than I was expecting because of one or two people have dropped out. But I do want to thank you and Conservative Progress for arranging the webinar, and more than that, for taking such a high-profile, proactive role in supporting the union and and how important the union is to all of us. I suspect that most of us who joined this event take a great interest in the union, think it's incredibly important, and that we must do what we can to ensure that we don't allow the breakup of the United Kingdom. Now then, when we talk about the issues that are relevant in Wales, I think you'll find, I think there's disagreement about the best way forward on all of them. And I thought the best thing I could do, rather than be overly balanced, is just say what my view is. Sometimes there'll be members who disagree with it and some who agree, but I still think it's better to stimulate the debate if I just say what I think. Now, all of us know that the union is experiencing some pretty serious challenges at the moment. In Scotland, we have most opinion polls suggesting that there's a majority now, strong majority, in favour of separatism, of independence. That isn't quite the case in Wales. But what I do think is that I sense there's a movement towards independence in Wales. I think it's growing, it's becoming slightly stronger. And I want to comment once or twice at the influence that Scotland has on that trend. But those of us who really value the union, I just think we have got to take it seriously. I think the trend is towards supporting the Welsh National Party, the Plaid Cymru, and I just think we need to take it seriously, and we need to be conscious about what's happened in Scotland, how suddenly a view that you thought was sound suddenly can disappear, and you can lose an argument by not taking it seriously enough. And I wanted to just comment on two issues that I think are feeding into this, and then finally a comment about the devolution process itself. I think the COVID-19 pandemic is having an impact on support for the union. Now, that isn't immediately obvious, but I think it has a significant support, simply because for the first time in my life, and probably most of the people on this webinar, we have two governments. I mean, Scotland has two governments at a high profile. and Wales has two governments. And I don't think the challenges to the national governments, of the Scottish Parliament and in the Welsh the Welsh government here, I don't think it's just testing, it's just trying as it is to the UK. And I think that feeds into this division between, I don't think there is huge division between the governments, but there's an impression that there's a division between the two. And that feeds into a view, well, you know, I mean, some people will agree with what the Welsh government is doing. I think this feeds into the view that if the Welsh government can deal with this issue, which is the biggest issue we faced for decades, there's no earthly reason why he couldn't form the government. So I think there's that trend. The Labour government in Wales is not in favour of separatism at all, but inadvertently, I think it is giving succour to the drive towards separatism. And I think the Brexit debate is much the same. And it's not immediately obvious, but Scotland was a Remain country. It voted very strongly for Remain. And a lot of the Scottish people feel at the moment that they've been let down. They feel the United Kingdom government isn't being supportive of Scotland. And I think that's been a very significant part of driving the separatist agenda in Scotland. Well, I think that really makes, and that sympathy, the cross-Celtic nation sympathy, spills over, I think, into Wales. I'm desperate to see us have a trade deal on the 1st of January. And I just hope that as a Conservative party, I think we use Hogmanay as the starting date for trying to persuade the Remain side of this debate to look at the Conservative Party in a positive way. I mean, we want to have a good relationship with the European Union and the European countries. They're our closest trading neighbours, hugely important to us. But we want to do it as an independent country. And I think that's a hugely important argument in not driving a separatist agenda in Wales. And I just hope desperately we have this deal, which I feel pretty sure we will, and that we do that. And the final comment I want to make is about the devolution process itself. Now, I was campaigning in 1999 against the setting up of a Welsh Assembly. I thought it was a big mistake, and I thought it wouldn't settle any debates, and it hasn't. But we lost, my side lost. And since then, it's been crucial, I think, that we try to make certain that this new arrangement, which is in place, works for us and doesn't the step by step, the process, famously the process rather than the event, doesn't take us too far down the separatist road. There's still a lot of view, and it tends to be more in the Conservative Party, I think, than in others, that it'd be in some way we can reverse this. I just think that is such a mistake. I just think we have to find a way of satisfying the people of Wales who are suspicious, who do not want us to go down this road, of saying we can take over as the leading, take over the Assembly as the government of the Assembly, and that we can try to make certain that we run this as a way that isn't driving the nations of the United Kingdom in separate directions, that we all work together and we don't threaten our union. I mean, I've kept going for probably more than 5 minutes, and now it's, I think, over to questions, unless Robin's arrived.
Robin has arrived, actually. Hello, Robin. How's it going?
Good evening, all. I'm really well, thank you. I apologise for the delay. We had, as ever, a vote, and it was to do with the overseas, service overseas, and a couple of other technical administrative matters. So I've just come back from voting right now, so I'm straight into this. I don't know what's gone before me or what's been said. Do you want to give me a steer on how I can help?
Not to worry at all. Look, thanks so much for joining. So if we hear another bell in the background, we'll see
that should be it for the evening. That should be it.
Okay. Look, thank you again so much for joining, Robert. I gave you an introduction to our attendees before. You're obviously the MP for Aberconwy in North Wales and the chair of the Conservative Union Research Group. And Glenn just walked us through some really good points, which maybe we can come back to. One I would like to come back to is sort of how we differentiate between constitutional settlements, which are permanent, and governments, which are generally temporary, and how we make those distinctions. But perhaps for people who don't know or didn't join the launch event where you spoke about the Conservative Union Research Group, which you chair, I think it would be great to hear a little about that, and then perhaps what it's like being an MP in Wales, in the UK Parliament, which I know Glyn was as well until very recently.
Well, I've got to watch what I say with Glyn sitting there, because he will spot all the mistakes that I'm making, and and hopefully will give me some quiet words of wisdom outside the meeting, Glyn, afterwards, please. Look, first of all, being an MP, as people will know, is an incredible privilege. One of the things that happens, and has happened even despite the pandemic and the lockdown and the restrictions that has placed on us, is that you get to meet all sorts of fascinating people and learn all sorts of interesting things about this constituency. I was born and raised next door in Bangor. You know, I thought I knew North Wales. You become the MP for your, I dare say, even your own patch, and you start to learn things that you never knew before. And it's that very privileged position of putting you at the centre of a network of people. And my brother actually was the one who characterised it very well after we'd been talking, and he said, "So what's the job like?" And he described it to me as, he said, "Yeah," he said, "I guess what ends up on your desk is the problems that no one else has been able to solve." And that, in many respects, is for some people, you are their last resort. You know, whether it's a wife whose husband is in jail, and there is an appeal process going through, or there is an appeal that wishes to be launched, but you are the last resort. If it's someone who's stuck overseas in a foreign country, can't get back, the family might turn to you as the last resort. If they need access to drugs, life-changing drugs for their child, you're their last resort, and they turn to you. And that's both an incredible privilege, but also equally, it is a huge responsibility in these days. Now, I mention that because the interesting thing then about being a Welsh MP is that a lot of the things which you might normally turn to help with are already devolved. And so I've had to work very closely with Janet Finch-Saunders, who's our Senedd member here in Aberconwy, and she's been terrific. She's very experienced, she's very vocal, is very busy in and around the chamber. And of course, that's one of the problems that we've had in Wales, is that the chamber has been empty. Because the Welsh Labour government has chosen to be effectively a policy of absence. And I don't know if we've got any of the Assembly members here on the call, but effectively the stories I'm hearing are of the First Minister broadcasting through Zoom from his office, which is just down the corridor from the chamber, and not actually coming into the chamber and facing the scrutiny that comes with it. So these are some of the difficulties. And in fact, it was that kind of difficulty which really led to the formation of the CURG, the Conservative Union Research Group. And if anyone there is on Twitter, you can follow it there, at Conservative URG. And you'll see it's basically a group of about 80 Conservative backbenchers. And we decided that the union was something that was important. We recognised we are the Conservative and Unionist Party. We recognised too that there was a manifesto commitment to strengthening the union. And then out of sheer frustration with finding, it was actually to do with flooding and the response to flooding earlier in the year, Storm Ciara. Out of that frustration, I started to speak to Scottish colleagues and said, look, is it like this in Scotland when you're working as an MP, a UK government MP, but you've got this devolution? Is it like this in Scotland? And they said, yes, absolutely. I said, well, why aren't we talking then? And it was out of that frustration, a sense of we need to do something about this, that we started it. It very quickly became this is too difficult, because this is something that has taxed some of the best legal and political brains in our country for more than 2 decades. And yet there was also a sense of imperative. We had to do something. So we decided the way to approach this was not to come with solutions, but just to say somebody's got to be doing something about this. So that's the way we've stepped into it. And just today, as an example, as chair of the Union Research Group, I've had a discussion about the union connectivity review. And this is a major review of infrastructure across the union and how that will help develop the union, how it will build relationship, help improve trade, and therefore be an essential investment in strengthening the union. So it's a fantastic opportunity to get involved in those sorts of really practical and forward-looking initiatives which have a prospect to improve things and strengthen the union for us. At the flip side, and I'll finish with this as an example as well as the flip side of that is, at the moment I face a lot of scrutiny locally because I've been quite vocal about opposing the national lockdown in Wales. And so, of course, over the weekend, the immediate response is, ha, 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 you see, and now there's going to be a national lockdown in England. It doesn't look so clever, does it, Robin? And my point has been a very simple one, to say this is all about evidence. In Wales, the gap, the chasm, is the lack of evidence to justify the decisions that were made. It just simply doesn't exist. We've asked and asked and it hasn't been. Whereas in England, at least, there is a considered process and there's evidence which I can see and look at and say, yes, these things matter. And so those sorts of challenges are what you have to deal with. It makes for there hasn't been a dull day yet. And Glyn, I know, will have his own stories and war stories about dealing with devolved matters and how they're handled. But I suppose then the final point, a second final point, but this one really will be, is when people say, well, why are you voting on something that only affects England? And my answer is very simple. I'm a United Kingdom citizen. I was elected by citizens of the United Kingdom and taxpayers of the United Kingdom to the Parliament of the United Kingdom. Now, whatever fanciful nationalist narrative people might have or imaginations of separatism, those are facts. They may be inconvenient for them, but they bear repeating every time. And it's a debate killer. I get these long posts saying, why are you doing this? And I just say, UK Parliament elected by UK citizens, and there's no answer to it. The union is strong. I'm in a good place here with the union, but I'll stop there.
No, I 100% agree. I think the union is strong, but we just need to keep talking about it more and more and more. Just because I think as a nation, we sometimes we're quietly patriotic. We wear our poppies.
I'm not. I have to say, on Saturday, I was devastated when we lost to Scotland. I'm a proud Welshman. I'm from a local boy. I'm proud to be Welsh. Second language is Welsh, but I'm proud to be Welsh. But I sat in, and I'm sorry, I'm perhaps talking too much here, but I'm a member of the Welsh Affairs Select Committee, and we took evidence on the impact of the UK Internal Markets Bill on devolution. And we have 3 academics. You can look at this all, it's all online. 3 academics speak to us. And after half an hour of listening to the evidence they presented, 2 from Scotland and 1 from Cardiff University, I interrupted. I asked the chairman if I could ask a question, Stephen Crabb from Pembrokeshire. He said, yes, go ahead, Robin. So I said, for the sake of clarity and for the record, would each of the witnesses please confirm that actually UK is a sovereign government, that the devolved administrations are not, and this puts a limit on the equivalence which you seem to be applying? And they also rather choked and sputtered over it, but each one of them in turn eventually conceded that actually the UK government has sovereign status. None of the devolved administrations do. It might sound like a fine point, but actually it puts a chasm again between the two. They're simply not equivalent. Anyway, I'll stop there.
No, that was fantastic. Excellent points, and it sort of comes back to the very first thing that Glyn mentioned in his introductory remarks about the difference between a government led by a particular political party and a parliament or a nation, which is obviously has a lot more permanence and actual sovereignty. Governments don't have sovereignty. It's the parliament that has sovereignty. And we have had a couple of questions. And Glyn, if you want to come back on any of those points, that would be great. But we just had very first question in is really about I guess it goes back to party politics as well. They're both Labour and the Conservatives nationally, at least Labour on paper, are still a unionist party. I was just wondering, do we think in Wales, or the question is, do we think in Wales that Labour is doing enough? And we know in Scotland, for example, they clearly aren't. But in Wales, are they seen to be a real supporter of the union? And could we work together on that point? Glenn, maybe with your experience of your time as an MP, you might be able to comment.
Well, I do think we will be able to, but I think in the short term, I think COVID makes that very difficult. I mean, COVID has created the situation where a lot of people in Wales see us as having 2 governments, irrespective of the constitutional position that Robin talked about. there's an awful lot of members that see an equivalence between the Wales government and the UK, and a lot of that's driven, I think, by COVID. And I think we have to address that. It's probably a bit impossible at the moment. We have to address that as we come out of the pandemic, which will probably be in the early part of next year, because that is that's where we have to identify what Labour is. But then I don't think Labour are a separatist party at all. But inevitably, as in politics, they can't resist, I don't think, taking advantage of their position, their publicity they get, that the status they have has been effectively, in terms of dealing with COVID, having two governments. That's the way we look. And that's inevitable. It's the only issue. The only dominant issue is COVID, which creates that position. When a whole lot of other issues come onto the agenda, which they will, then I think we can return to the normal disagreement. Whenever we have a disagreement about COVID, it makes us in danger of making everybody look petty. People do not like those disagreements. We need to move on from that, I think, before we can re-establish it. But I don't think it's fair to describe Labour as being in any way a separatist party, except by the impact, perhaps, of what they do. It wouldn't be part of the philosophy. That's my view. Robin may disagree.
I don't disagree with Glyn, and in fact, I think I would urge Labour colleagues to reach deep into their hearts and resurface that union truth or union the vision of theirs, because at the moment, I think what's happening in Wales is that the Welsh Labour Party are in trouble and they know it, and they are leaning heavily into the nationalist vote, and so making noises which do sound very independent-like, and are very keen to separate and give a sense of separation. And I would agree with Glyn that certainly what's happened with COVID is they've grabbed that with both hands and seek every opportunity to make distinction and draw difference. I mean, what other motivation could the First Minister have had for saying, oh, I've asked the Chancellor if he'll bring back the change, or bring forward rather the change into the introduction of the job support scheme because we're starting earlier, when he had already asked the Chancellor and received a refusal. You know, he's doing that for political reasons. That's the only way that he could be seen to be, you know, that's the only explanation for that. And that I find unfortunate. But I think to Glyn's point about, you know, there being two governments, what I find, I'd be interested in his thoughts on this, what I find is that people don't like complexity. So the moment they find themselves challenged with, I've got two governments, they either switch off and disengage, or they say, yes, but I'm going to listen to this one. And so it's quite a simplistic way of looking at things. And I don't say this in any sense of to denigrate them. You know, that's I think a reaction in all of us. We don't seek out complexity. We don't seek out confusion. And when we're presented with it, we try and simplify. And it's our job as politicians to make things simple, to help people understand what's going on. So I think that's where some of the frustration lies. And my inbox, and Glyn, I'm sure will recognise this from his own time as an MP, my inbox has a mix of people who say, you know, you should be ashamed of yourself, you call yourself Welsh, but you're not. And others who are saying, you know, why isn't the Prime Minister doing this, this and this? And they're all devolved matters. So it's as if there's been a switch off which says, I'm sure I know it's devolved, but I'm still going to ask you, why isn't the Prime Minister in London doing something about it? It's not straightforward.
No, I think a lot of that comes down to, which is what we're trying to do at Conservative Progress, is to sort of highlight or tease out these issues so that people can start to understand them a little bit more and talk about them a little bit more. And another question we've had, actually, Robin, relates to what you were saying about your union connectivity review, which I think is personally, I think is a really good example of what the power of the UK government can have that devolved nations cannot, and would be a really good example of the power of our union. But on that wider point, what sort of things should we be talking about when we're trying to emphasize the value that the union brings across the nations? Is it the economy? Is it or is it something else? Robin, if you had a thought.
Well, I would say it's actually quite straightforward. This is not about a rational argument. The rational case is made, the rational case is won in a matter of minutes. Wales attracts a huge subsidy. There's a huge deficit in running. There's a moral duty on a nation to look after its weakest. And you've got to ask yourself, how do we look after the weakest in Wales if we're running a deficit and we cut ourselves off from that funding supply? It's irresponsible, it's immoral. So there's a really, really strong, compelling, rational case, which you can make into a moral case. But actually, I think ultimately it comes down to a very personal issue. And I know, Ed, we've spoken about these things before. When you understand that because of the union, we have things like the NHS, you understand that the union has shaped every one of our lives. And for something like the NHS, you know, conceived in Wales, even if it was delivered in Manchester first, but conceived in Wales, something which we hold dear. And then you realise that is because of the union. The union's economy is the only way we could afford such a model, which is unique in the world. Then you start to realise, actually, this is my life that this is being talked about. It's not an abstract concept. It's not simply a sensible way of doing business in a big world. It is actually something that is me. And that is, I think, the thing that we need to do, is we need to get people talking about their own story. I wrote an article in the Sunday Express, well, it was in July now, so it's a couple of months back. If you, again, look on Twitter at the Conservative URG feed, it's the pinned feed at the top. And it's because it sets out where the URG came from and why we're doing what we're doing. But in that, I tell a little bit of my own story, and each of us has our own story to tell. And actually, at the end of the day, when we go to bed, when we switch the lights out, when we're lying there, that's what our mind turns to, is my story, what happened with my parents, what happened in my life. It's not rational arguments about pounds and you know, trade deficits and these sorts of things. That's my feeling.
Can I come in there, Ed?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I agree absolutely with Robin about the economic benefits. I don't think there's any debate. I just think Wales, I mean, of course it could survive if we were to be separate, but it wouldn't survive in the way that we are now. I think the economic advantages of being part of the union are just huge for Wales. So much of the income is generated in the southeast of England as a Barnett formula, which gives Wales 20% more than it might justify by the population element. But I don't think that's the debate. I'm not even sure that's the debate in Scotland, but it isn't. It's much more, I think, emotional. It's people feeling Welsh. Now, I kind of understand this quite well because I feel Welsh. In actual fact, the first time I voted, I wasn't very interested in politics. I was just a rugby player and a farmer, and I voted for the Plaid Cymru simply because I felt Welsh. And I think and even though my instincts would all have been as conservative as could possibly be, I still, because I wasn't thought I should be voting for Plaid. It was, I look back now, not with shame actually. It's an understanding of what an awful lot of young people, how they feel. It's an emotional argument we've got to win. And when I was a PPS in Wales, probably the longest serving PPS ever. I was to Gerald Gillen when she was Secretary of State. And then Alan Cairns, when he was the Secretary, had asked me if I would carry on, which I did, and I enjoyed it. It was really good. But my big concern with the party was that we needed absolutely to have every department thinking, well, not just shunting issues off to the Wales office and say that's a Welsh issue, the Wales office will deal with it. We need to have the thread in every department that Scotland and Wales and the Union matter, and that we shouldn't just farm it off. I think that has got to infiltrate every single department, and I don't know whether it does, but it was argued so strongly and long enough, and I certainly hope it does. Because if it doesn't, I think the union is in danger of coming to an end.
Yeah, I would certainly say to that point. Sorry, I was just going to say certainly to that point. I hear a lot from people about polling and this sort of thing, and the threat is from Scotland, etc. I think that we need to draw breath on this, actually. I think that there is a very vocal minority. I think that we know from the analysis that the polling figures, for example, in Scotland are inflated by those who are disappointed that there's a Conservative government in Westminster, and all the narratives that feed from that about you know, English exceptionalism and supremacy and those sorts of things. But also there's a disappointment in the fact that we're leaving the EU and the Brexit reaction of people. So we know those figures are driven. And my strong sense is that, past January, we're into the question of whether there's a deal or no deal. That's been resolved. People are now dealing with more certainties, and they will start to build. And so time is on our side. There is no compulsion. Even if there's a resounding victory in Scotland in May, there is no compulsion on an instant or immediate vote. And in fact, even if a vote was triggered straight away, it would still take 2 years for that to be arranged and set up the legislation to be passed. So by that point, it'll be a very different world two and a half years down the road from what we're in today. So we must stop sort of catastrophizing and thinking that we're on a knife edge right now. Certainly we need to act, certainly we need to do the right thing, but I think there is a danger of overinflating some of the rhetoric that's around at the moment.
Yes, of course, and I think speaking about this, making it more part of our national debate and our and at the forefront of our political culture means that it just becomes something that naturally we support more naturally. So yes, that's a very good point, Robin and Glenn. And we have probably have time for just one more question. And possibly Glenn's in a good position initially to comment on this as the new chairman of the Welsh Conservatives. But what more can the National Party or the government do to help the Welsh Conservatives leading into the elections next year, for example?
That's going to be a really big issue for us. I mean, during my first two months, the total focus has been on candidate selection because we were coming from a long way back. But I think we've caught up on that. Now we're moving into development of policy for this election, and I think that will dominate us for the next few weeks. But I do think there's a role for the national government, and it's who we. It's no good sending somebody here just for a visit and doing a couple of press releases to back it up. I mean, people have got to understand that people are coming here to come into Wales because they want Wales to be a part of the union. They want Wales to be a part of what's happening at Westminster. And I don't think we've ever actually got that completely right. If I go back through history, the one person who did get it right was Peter Walker when I knew him first. And that's before your time, Robin. There's no you. But he managed to get that right. And when he first came to Wales, he went straight into the valleys. That's the one ambition I've got as a Conservative Party chairman. I don't want there to be any no-go areas. North Wales used to be a no-go area. That's what happened because we went there. North of England was the whole Red Wall issue. Nobody expected that, and I think we've got to look at the valleys and we've got to say that's part of Wales. There's a history. There's the coal industry. It's all part of Wales, and we've got to kind of understand that, and we've got to love these people. And just sort of talking to your own will never ever work. And you've just got to go out, not be aggressive and not shout at people, but try to understand why they feel differently from the way we feel, and have a rational debate. And anyway, that's far more fun than talking to your own people completely.
Robin, having a new slate of Conservative MPs should surely help next year as well. It should attract people into.
Well, it's done two things. It's done two things, or three things. First of all, it's put North Wales back on the map. We've never had more than 3 Welsh North Wales Conservative MPs, but now 7 out of 9 are Conservative. So that's a massive statement of intent about where the people of North Wales are and why what their ambition is. That's the first thing. The second thing then has been getting that name noticed in Westminster, and you'll find us often referring to in North Wales. We are overlooked and underfunded by Cardiff. That sort of rhetoric, and it's quite deliberate. And people now know that there are North Wales MPs acting as a group, and we're part of the northern group of MPs as well. Now, that's really important because when you think about how the government the UK government in Westminster is interacting with Wales, it has these city growth deals. So there is a North Wales Economic Ambition Board with a growth deal attached to it. So one practical thing that government can do ahead of the elections is make sure that those growth deals, and there are 3 or 4 of them across Wales, 4 I believe across Wales, is make sure that those are progressing. because they demonstrate real intent. There's no question of buying votes or anything, trite or facile like that. But it's partly to Glyn's point, saying these are about building a future where the links into Wales are strong and deep, and these are delivering real jobs, they're delivering real change and real improvement. There's a fantastic narrative which you can hang off the back of that. And that's a very simple and practical way that you start to line that up with election campaigning, and people can look at it and see, yep, there's some substance to this.
For sure, and we as Conservative Progress will endeavour to advertise your campaigns and your action days. Hopefully we'll be able to go out and wave some placards, maybe in a socially distanced manner, but we'll definitely be alongside
if I could very quickly say about that, Ed, and with the benefit of having Glyn there, I haven't had a chance to congratulate Glyn personally since his ascension to the role of chairman. Was transfiguration, is that the right word, Glyn, to the role of chairman? But developing. This comes at an absolutely pivotal moment. You look at the delivery of Britain leaving Europe with Brexit. You look at the 80-seat majority. You look at the change, the almost doubling of Conservative MPs in Wales. You look at the introduction of a new chairman. You look at the party report into what's happening in Wales. You look at the advent of an election off the back of a pandemic that has asked questions of every government in the UK. This is an absolutely pivotal moment. I think we'll look back at this period in 10 years, 20 years time and say something changed then. And people have got a fantastic opportunity to get involved with it. Come and walk the streets with us, come and leaflet, get on the phones and help with that. And you can be a part of it. It's as simple as that. I think something special could happen here.
For sure. And before I turn it back to both of you, just for a couple of closing remarks, I would say that actually, as a country, as a country and as a party, across the country, we're in a really good position. We're in, we've got our 80-seat majority. We've got good membership, good active membership. We've got brand new MPs who are enthusiastic and driven. And I think we're in a really good place. And sometimes we need to look beyond the sort of immediate problems, which, are wicked problems and really hard to figure out. And no matter which route you go down, you're going to have 50% of the people against you, 50% for you. And we need to realize that actually we're in a really advantageous position, and we need to take advantage of that and be proud of what we did last December, and be proud of the work we're doing for the elections next year, the following year, and into the future. I'd just like to hand over to Glyn, perhaps to give a few closing remarks from his side, and then I'll come back to you, Robin, and then we'll close up for the evening. So, Glyn, over to you.
Well, we've covered, I think, most of the issues, but I think we're potentially in a pretty good place in Wales. Now then, I think maybe 3 or 4 months ago, we were facing a lot of really change, destabilizing change within the party, having a review of the party, which was delayed for a while. A chief executive was leaving. It didn't look great, but I think now we've got into a position when candidates will be selected this week to start with, and I just feel we're starting to talk seriously about politics. We've got what we call a policy strategy group, which includes Paul Davies, the leader in the group, and Simon Hart, the Secretary of State for Wales, and myself. We're meeting at least once a week, and this kind of all of us working off the same page. I mean, there's going to be disagreements inevitably. I'm sure if this carried on for another hour, Robin and I would find 2 or 3 things to disagree about. But that's politics, and that's never caused people not to support you. If you're discussing a serious issue, they don't. But we need to be discussing a serious issue, putting the interests of Wales and indeed the culture of Wales, which also matters. We haven't touched on that, the language and culture, which we've done more for than really any other party, actually. We need to put these things at the very heart. And I just think the future, maybe my involvement has only been 2 months, but I may be starting to feel a little bit overconfident. But I just think it's starting to turn in our direction, despite the but very difficult environment that we're working into with COVID and Brexit. And I just think next year, as long as we can deal with the COVID issue and start talking to people and talking among each other in public, I think it's looking pretty good.
Yeah, I would encourage people to think about three different things. First of all, we're seeing a lot of heat and noise around issues like free school meals over in England, but that has repercussions in terms of for any MP, and there's been a lot of noise about that. But those are what I'd call the short term, the tactical skirmishes, if you like. Important issues, feeding children, what could be more important? But these are very much at a kind of a policy level. There's a lot of political positioning which goes on around those without detracting from the seriousness of the issue. Underneath that, you've got the longer term, bigger commitments, the manifesto commitments, leaving the EU, getting back control of our borders, strengthening the union, levelling up the regions. The government is making big strides on those things, hasn't been deflected from any of them. So there is good progress. That's at the slightly deeper level. But if you go even a level below that and you ask, what is it to be a Conservative? Actually, Ed, I'd point to someone like yourself and the group, because this is the vibrancy, the number of ideas, the quality of debate that is going on, the importance that we place upon culture, to Glyn's point, and the way people feel this is something to be cherished and fought for. That really gives me some optimism for the future, for the long-term future, not just for the next headline, not even for the next election, but for the long-term future. I would say not only is the union strong, the Conservative Party is strong, and that leaves me with a big smile on my face.
Really, what a really positive note to end on. Look, thank you all so much, and thank you to everyone who joined. And we do have two more campaign events, the Love Our Union campaign in the diary. So the first one is on Monday, the 23rd of November, where we will be discussing the economy. So we have Murdo Fraser, economic spokesman for the Scottish Conservatives, and we have Matt Kilcoyne from the Adam Smith Institute, and hopefully another TBC. And then we have our Love Our Union Day, which is going to be all online this year, which is great, on the 30th of November, and more details will be coming out in our newsletters very, very soon. And that just leaves me to thank Glyn and Robin one more time. I think it's been a fantastic event. You know, we've touched on Wales, or we've deep dived into Wales. We've touched on some wider issues, and I come away from each of these events really, really positive, and really sort of beaming about the state of our union, beyond what sometimes you read in the paper. So if everyone could follow Robin's group, which is at Conservative URG, and we at Conservative Progress are at Tory Progress, where we give out all our information about events. But thank you so much again, Robin, and thank you, Glyn. And thank you everyone for joining. Have a great rest of the evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.